Hello, thank you so much for your interest in watching this recorded session of Financial Aid 101. My name is Carrie Temkin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the outreach coordinator at the Office of Student Financial Aid at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Now, most of the information that I'm sharing in this presentation is applicable not just at UW-Madison, but no matter where you're thinking of going to college for your next steps in your higher education journey. There are some caveats to that, and I'll be very explicit when I'm talking about programs that are only for UW-Madison as well. To start things off, I want to acknowledge the land on which UW-Madison is. I personally am here right now as well. And something to think about is most universities are on ancestral land of indigenous nations. So it's important to acknowledge that land and think about how the history of that university is just a minor blip in the whole history of that land. So the University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Day-Jope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. So now we're going to transition into talking about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, because that is the entry point into being able to access financial aid at most institutions. Now, if you are a senior in high school and you're watching this and you already filled out the FAFSA, you can zoom forward about halfway through this presentation. That's when I'll be talking about the nitty-gritty information about financial aid, grants, scholarships, work study, all of that stuff. But I do want to take a good amount of time to talk specifically about the FAFSA because it is so important in being able to access financial aid. I do want to mention that it is free, the free application for federal student aid. You shouldn't have to pay to fill out the FAFSA. I'll talk more in depth about this, but generally speaking, most traditional college students do need parental information on the FAFSA. So be prepared to provide both parental and student information when filling it out. Now, your senior year of high school is when you'll fill out the FAFSA for the first time, but my guess is that you're going to be applying to more than one university. Your senior year in high school, though, you only have to fill out the FAFSA once, and you can enter in multiple different schools or school codes to have the FAFSA information sent to. However, the FAFSA is not just a one and done type of relationship. You can expect to fill out the FAFSA every single year you need to access financial aid. So if you want to pull out your phone right now and put in a recurring event for every October 1st for the next 4 years or however many years to remind you to fill out the FAFSA, you go ahead and do that. I won't even be able to see you to know that you're doing it. You can find it at FAFSA.gov. Now, it is different from the CSS profile. The CSS profile is something that's used by predominantly private schools. So if you have an institution that is asking you to fill out the CSS profile in addition to or instead of the FAFSA, and you have questions about that, ask the institutions that are requiring that for their financial aid. Now, I told you could pull out your phone and put in a recurring event for October 1st. It's because that's when it becomes available every single year, October 1st, for the next academic year. So for our seniors in high school, you can fill it out already now. We do have, and the date of this recording is October 10th. So most universities have some sort of priority deadline that they want you to have the FAFSA filled out by. UW-Madison's priority deadline is December 1st. So it is important to get the FAFSA done relatively early. A question that we get asked a lot is, well, is some money first come, first serve? And the answer to that is it depends on the university. There very, very well could be universities who have sort of a first come, first serve basis until some funding runs out. But generally speaking, federal funding doesn't work like that. And a lot of the state-based deadlines are usually after priority deadlines of universities, but it is something to keep in mind. When you're filling out the FAFSA, you're going to answer all of the questions as the day of you filling it out. So as a snapshot in time. So for instance, when it's asking you for the amount that you have in your savings, you'd pull up your online bank account and look at how much you have in your savings and pop that in. The caveat to that is when it's talking about tax information, it's actually using prior tax year information so that you don't have to wait to fill out the FAFSA until you've filed your taxes. So to give some texture around this, for our seniors in high school this year, you'll be starting college. Again, I'm making an assumption that you're going straight from high school into college, but you'd be starting college the fall of 2023. You'd fill out the FAFSA now-ish, October of 2022, and you would use 2021 tax information. So juniors will be using 2022 tax information and so forth. So what do you need? I already mentioned this earlier. You can expect to use student and parent information on the FAFSA. Now, there are some caveats to that. If the student is over the age of 24, if they're married, if they have a child that they provide more than 50% of the support for, if they're an active military service member or a veteran, or if they were orphaned after the age of 13, those are all circumstances where a student would be considered independent on the FAFSA and does not need to include parent information. Other circumstances where a student would be considered independent is where it's unsafe or unreasonable to get parental information. So in situations of abandonment, abuse, incarceration, things like that. And in those circumstances, students should definitely reach out to the financial aid offices. We can help support you as you're filling out the FAFSA for guidance there. But by and large, most students do need parental information on the FAFSA, even if the parents cannot or choose not to support the student financially while they're in school. Now, in order to start the FAFSA and to digitally sign it, both the student and the parent need to create their own FSA ID. Basically, it's the login credentials and the digital signature for anything federal financial aid related. It's tied to your social security number. So if folks don't have a social security number, if a parent doesn't have a social security number, they won't be able to create an FSA ID. So in order to sign it, students who are in that situation would have to print the signature page. The parent would physically sign it and mail it in. Students do need to be U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens to fill out the FAFSA. So students do need a social security number. So going back to the FSA ID, because it is tied to your social security number, it's very important that the student has their own. It's their social security tied to their own login information, tied to their own email address, and the parent has their own as well. Now, most things on the FAFSA we can fix. So if you screw something up or you have anxiety around, oh my gosh, what if I do this wrong? Take a deep breath. Most things we can go in and fix either through our office, or you can fix it through a correction and go back and change things. Something that's a little trickier to fix is if you screw up your social security number when you're creating your FSA ID. And the way that we find that happens most often is either just through a typo, so take your time, but also if a parent is doing everything and sitting down and pretending to be the student and filling it out for the student, that's when sometimes we see them flipping their information with the student's information. So I'm going to get on a little soapbox here and say that this is a really good time to have students be part of the process. It is a good practice at adulting, right? But also once a student starts college, there's this iron wall that comes down called FERPA, and it protects student information. It's kind of like the higher education version of HIPAA, if you've ever heard of that. So once a student starts school, if a parent calls our office and says, hey, I've got some questions about my student's financial aid, we would say, we can tell you general information, but we would love for the student to call us because we can't share most information with you as a parent without a FERPA release on file. And sometimes that's a pretty jarring thing, right? So I'll get off my soapbox here. My point here is that it's really important to have students be part of this whole process. And one very good reason is so that they create their own FSA ID. That was a long-winded thing to say. Students do this too. I mentioned this already. Students do need to have a social security number. And if they're not a U.S. citizen, then also an alien registration number as well. You'll want your federal income taxes, your W-2s, and other records of money earned in front of you while you're filling it out. Also, bank statements and other records of investment, all the money stuff, right? Pull together all of the money stuff as you're filling out the FAFSA, and also any records of untaxed income. So now some tips and tricks. When you're creating your FSA ID, I mentioned already that it's tied to your social security number, but also to a email address. Students, use a personal email address when you are creating your FSA ID. Don't use a school email address, because this will be the same login that you use the next 4 years, maybe the next 10 years, depending on what path you go down for your education. And you're not going to have access to your high school email address likely later down the road. Same thing goes for parents. Don't use a work email address, because that can change too, right? If a parent, or when a parent is asked for a social security number, if you do not have one as the parent, you can enter in all zeros when it asks for that. Another question that we get asked a lot is, well, what if my parents are divorced? Which one do I use on the FAFSA? And the answer to that right now is whichever parent the student lived with the most in the last 12 months. Whichever parent the student lived with the most in the last 12 months. That is the parent that is put on the FAFSA, and just that parent's information is included on the FAFSA. But if that parent has remarried, then step parent information is also included on the FAFSA, regardless if that step parent has anything to do with actually supporting the student in college. Okay. Now, another question that we get about divorced families is, well, what if it's 50-50? What if placement is, split right down the middle? Then you would use whatever parent provides the most financial support. Next up, I've mentioned this several times already. I'm going to mention it one more time because we do get lots of questions about this. What if a student is paying for everything? Do you still need parental information on the FAFSA? And the answer to that is, per federal regulation, yes, you do, except for the caveats that I mentioned earlier. Another question that we get asked a lot is, well, how does a 529 college savings plan show up on the FAFSA? For our Wisconsin folks, maybe you've heard of EdVest. That's an example of 529 college savings plans. The most typical way that we see it is when it's owned by the custodial parent. So when the parent is filling out their section of the FAFSA, they would report their 529 as an investment. Let's say that that parent has 3 kids and each kid has a 529 account. They would add up those investments and list all of them on the FAFSA, even though the FAFSA that they're filling out maybe is just for one child, because it's looking at overall financial, the overall financial picture. You do not have to report disbursements of this later on. Another situation that we see is when the 529 is owned by someone else. So if it's owned by a grandparent, for instance, or an uncle, or most likely if it's owned by a parent who, because of divorce, is not on the FAFSA. If that's the circumstance, then there's no place for it to show up on the FAFSA because it's not tied to the parent or the student at that point. However, it has to show up somewhere. So next year, after the student actually uses the disbursements from that 529, the student has to report it as untaxed income. All right, some more tips and tricks. As you're filling out the FAFSA, you will have the opportunity to use something called the IRS data retrieval tool. I highly recommend that you use this. It can be your best friend. Basically, it gives the FAFSA permission to suck in all of your information and spit it right back into the FAFSA. And first of all, it's less stuff that you have to fill out manually, right? So it makes the process go smoother, faster, and less room for human error. Another good reason to use it is because it lowers your chances of being selected for verification. Verification is a random process that the federal government selects a little less than like 1/5 of all FAFSAs randomly for to go through this process, which means that a student just has to provide extra documentation to show that what they put on the FAFSA is accurate. If you fill out the IRS data retrieval tool, or if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, it lowers your chances of getting selected. Okay, so the FAFSA is a federal website. being used by hundreds of thousands of families all right around the same time of year. So sometimes it can be a little glitchy. I'm not saying this to give the FAFSA a bad rap. The feds hear about those glitches and are fast at fixing them. But I say this for two reasons. One, if you're filling out the FAFSA and you see yourself kind of going in circles, like it's not doing what you think it should be doing, I invite you to take a deep breath. Don't smash your computer, right? You can save the FAFSA, save it, come back the next day. Likely that glitch is probably fixed at that point. And another reason that I'm mentioning this is plan ahead. Don't wait until the day before the priority deadline of your top choice school to fill out the FAFSA, because there could just be technical issues that are outside of your control. As you're filling it out, after every entry point, there's a little question mark bubble. If you're unsure what the question is asking or where to find that information or how it pertains to you, you can click that question mark bubble and it expands and gives some really excellent information about what it's asking or where to find it. If that's not helpful, then I also recommend you check out the live chat agent. They have live chat agents 7 days a week, pretty late during the weekday too, I think till 10 p.m. Eastern. And you can talk to an actual human and they can pull up your account and give you some more information. So you can find that under the Contact Us section of the FAFSA. Another question that we get asked a lot is, well, what if my financial circumstances are different when I start college than when I filled out the FAFSA almost a year before? Or what if my financial circumstances on the FAFSA aren't accurate based on taxes from 2 years ago? So these would be things like all the bad stuff that you think about, right? If there was a death in the family or a loss of income, divorce, things like that. Those would be circumstances where you definitely want to reach out and we can, and any financial aid can reassess your financial aid offer. It's not guaranteed to change anything, but we're happy to take a peek at that. You can also reach out if good things happen too, like if there was an added family member recently, a one-time type of income that isn't reflective of your overall financial circumstances. Those are some examples where you can reach out. Here's a little thing I found on the internet. I look forward to filling out the FAFSA forms. Said no one ever. I think the FAFSA for some reason has a pretty bad rap. I shouldn't say pretty bad rap. There's a reputation about the FAFSA, but honestly, the feds have done a lot of, they've done a lot of improvements, especially in the last few years, to help the FAFSA be more student-friendly, easier to fill out. So I just changed this a little bit until now, right? Because you're here, you're learning this information. And if you are watching this from Wisconsin, I highly recommend that you take a peek at College Goal Wisconsin. It's a nonprofit that has events all over the state where they bring together financial aid experts at local high schools, libraries, community centers. You come with your family, you fill out the FAFSA right then and there. If you have questions, there's experts to answer those questions, and you get entered into a scholarship drawing. So it's pretty sweet. There are also virtual events as well. And if you're not from Wisconsin, many other states have some sort of FAFSA filing resource available. So check that out. All right, so after you file the FAFSA and submit it, you'll get something called the Student Aid Report. This is basically the receipt of your FAFSA. Now, if you don't get an email of this, that's kind of a red flag of, oh, did I not submit it? Is it missing information? So go back, log back in and see if it's missing information, like a parent signature, for instance. The Student Aid Report that you get has some really important information on it. You will learn what your expected family contribution is. I'm going to talk a lot more about that, but just to lay the foundation right away, the expected family contribution is not what you have to pay to go to school. I'll talk more about that later though. You'll also learn in the Student Aid Report your basic eligibility for federal financial aid. So you'll know that if you're eligible for the Pell Grant, for instance, and if you are eligible for the Pell Grant, you'd be eligible for that no matter what school you went to. At this point, you would also learn if you were selected for the process called verification. And again, that's the federal process that says you have to show extra documentation to show that what you put on the FAFSA is accurate. Now, even though it is a federal process, you have to go through the actual verification mechanism, or the process of verification at every individual school that you applied to that you want to get a financial aid offer. So it's really important to take good records and good notes of which schools are asking for what information and who you submitted what to. All right, so then the results of the FAFSA are electronically sent to the schools that you put in the FAFSA through the school codes. Now I say school codes, but there's drop down where you can say what state you're looking for the school, what city the school's in, and then you select the actual school. So you don't need to know the school code right away when you're filling out the FAFSA. There's a process that you can identify that. You can enter in one school right away and then go back in and enter more later on, or you can enter in up to 10 right away. Let's say you're a rock star and you're applying to more than 10 schools. What you'll do is wait until you hear back from those schools about your acceptance. Maybe you didn't get accepted to all of them. You can go back into the FAFSA, delete the schools that you weren't accepted to, and then add new schools that will then get the additional FAFSA information. You can contact all of the schools that you're applying to with any special circumstances. Something to note that every school has a different timeline, a different process. So don't be surprised if a school says, thanks for reaching out. Please reach back out in February, or thanks for reaching out. You'll hear from us in March, whatever. So just be aware that different schools have different timelines. And then lastly, don't expect to receive a financial aid offer until you've been accepted to the university. However, all schools who receive federal funding are required to have something called a net price calculator somewhere on their website. A net price calculator is kind of what it sounds like, a calculator where you can input some information like your expected family contribution that you learned from your student aid report. Maybe the net price calculator will ask if you're in state or out of state, what your household adjusted gross income is, some other questions like that, and then it'll spit out an estimate of your financial aid offer. Now, do note that it could be last year's net price calculator, so use it as an estimate, right? Nothing's going to be official until you get that financial aid offer from the university. All right, so what FAFSA, what does it do? Why do we even bother with it? This is how I like to think about it. It's this little machine that lives in the cloud, and it sucks in your information, your financial information, your household information, and it spits out the expected family contribution. That is the whole reason why we fill out the FAFSA. It is the golden number, but it is a misnomer. It's completely a misnomer. The expected family contribution, oh boy, sorry about that. The expected family contribution is not what you have to pay to go to school. Think of it rather as an index number from the FAFSA. It's the federal government's way of comparing financial strength of families across the nation. And every university uses that expected family contribution a little differently. There could be some universities that say, based on your expected family contribution, we will calculate your financial need and we'll cover your whole financial need. That's a lot of jargon. So let me break that up. Financial need is a calculation. Again, it's the cost of attendance at that university based on estimates. So above and beyond tuition and fees, it's looking at the cost of attendance is tuition and fees, housing and meals, books and supplies, transportation estimates, personal expenses, things like that. So the total cost of attendance minus whatever your expected family contribution is, that's financial need. So there are some schools that cover your full financial need, but not every school has the ability to do that. So when we're talking about financial need, I'm taking 3 universities right here in my backyard in the Madison area. These are the costs from last year. So Edgewood, cost of attendance is $43,400. It's a 4-year private school. UW-Madison, 4-year public. Madison College, a 2-year school. So you see here that for this particular year, the cost is different at the universities, but the expected family contribution is the same at every university. So it's the financial need that varies. For our visual learners out there, It's another way to think of it, right? So the possibility of getting more financial aid at Edgewood is greater for two reasons. One, your financial need is greater, but also Edgewood is a private school, and that's a big difference between public schools and private schools. Private schools, generally speaking, cost a lot more than public schools, but because of their greater endowments, they are able to give more institutional funding than a public school might. So never count yourself out of a process. Never count yourself out of a university because you don't think you can afford to go there. If you're interested in a school, you can apply, see what financial aid they have to offer, and then make that determination. All right, so the expected family contribution, really it boils down to the lower your income, the more your expenses, the greater your financial need is. Now, it does take into account everything that you put in the FAFSA, every question that it asks, but there are some main determinants, including student and parent income and assets. And then expenses are looking at the number of people living in the household and the number of family members, except the parents, who are in college at the same time. We also get a lot of questions about how are assets reported on the FAFSA, so I just pulled out a few of those. This is super important. Do not report retirement investments on the FAFSA. Do not report retirement investments. You also do not report the value of the home that you live in. But if you have a second home or like a lake home or something like that, you do report that as an investment. You only report business or farm assets if there are more than 100 full-time equivalent employees. And if you own rental properties, you would report that as an investment, looking at the value of the home minus the debt owed on it, even if it's under an LLC. So all of the information that I shared with you is current as of this year, but Congress passed something called the FAFSA Simplification Act, and there's some big changes coming down the road. It was initially supposed to be enacted for this year, for I guess next academic year, and it was pushed back 1 year. It could be pushed back another year, we're not sure. But there are some significant changes coming that, if it's not pushed back, would be relevant for juniors in high school, filling it out for the first time. The whole point is to expand access to financial aid and to simplify and reduce the number of questions that are on the FAFSA. And some of the big changes that we know about so far are that it's going to no longer call the number that the FAFSA spits out the expected family contribution, which is a good thing, right? Because we just talked about how that's not accurate of what it is. It's going to be called the Student Aid Index. Another change is that the parents on the FAFSA in a divorced household will move from which parent the student has lived with the most to it's only going to look at which parent has provided the most financial support. Number of children in college will no longer be a factor. They're changing the entire calculation. There will be some changes to how business assets are included on the FAFSA. There will also be an automated connection to the IRS as well. And it's still in the works, so stay tuned. But I think it's helpful when big changes are coming to know that, it's something to be aware of. All right, so we've gotten about halfway into the presentation. Now I'm going to talk about the whole reason we need financial aid for costs, right? It costs money to go to college. Now, when you're looking at your financial aid offers, there's going to be a lot of numbers on there. It's going to take a lot of time to actually consume what this means. And it's really important as you're looking at your financial aid offers that you're comparing apples to apples. So something that I want to make clear when we're talking about the cost of attendance is that there's a difference between direct expenses and indirect expenses. So your direct expenses are the things that you will be billed for directly from the university. There's a due date for that bill. There are consequences to not paying that bill on time. And those generally include tuition and fees and housing and meals if you live in the residence halls. Indirect expenses are the things that you need to be thinking about and budgeting for because you have to be a human in order to be a student. So indirect expenses may include course materials. So there could be some classes that you do get billed for books directly from the bursar's office, for instance. Or you might have to buy all of your books outside of your actual billing mechanism and you buy your books from the bookstore, or you rent your books from Amazon, or rent your books from the bookstore, whatever. Personal expenses. This is looking at how often are you buying new clothes? How often are you eating off campus, going to the movies, things like that, where you want to have fun, you want to be a human, but you're not going to get a bill from the university every time you make a trip to Target, right? But you want to keep that in mind for your budgeting purposes. Transportation is estimates based on visiting home a couple times a year. So you'll see that when you're looking at a cost of attendance, there's likely a difference in what's budgeted for an in-state student versus an out-of-state student, because it probably costs more to visit home. I'll use Wisconsin as an example. If you live in California, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more to visit home, to go to California than down the road to Milwaukee, for instance. And then loan fees, well, you're only charged loan fees if you take out loans. So when you're comparing financial aid offers, make sure that you also understand what your direct expenses are and how to budget for your indirect expenses. All right, so now we're actually into the financial aid part, types of financial aid. First, I'm going to talk about the stuff that people generally think about when they hear financial aid. It's the good stuff, the money that doesn't have to be paid back, and that's grants and scholarships. Now, these grants and scholarships can be coming from a variety of different sources, some from the federal government, like the Pell Grant, which you would be, if you're eligible for, you'd be eligible for it at different universities. Different states have state funding as well. And then there's institutional funding. That's what the actual university has to offer you in grants and scholarships. But then there's also private funding sources, like maybe your parent's employer has a scholarship. Maybe there's a local community foundation with scholarships, things that are outside of the university. So with scholarships, a really important question to ask is, how is merit-based scholarships, or how do I apply for merit-based scholarships? There are some universities where you are automatically in the running for merit-based scholarships just through your application process, and those scholarships would show up on your financial aid offer. There are some universities, like UW-Madison, for instance, where anything on your financial aid offer is solely based on your financial need, so information from the FAFSA. At UW-Madison, if you want to apply for merit-based scholarships or be in the running for merit-based scholarships, you have to apply for them separately. And you can't wait until you're accepted to the university because some deadlines will have passed. So you can apply for scholarships after you apply to the university at UW-Madison specifically. So again, questions to ask are, how do I get merit-based scholarships at your university? Do I have to apply for them, or am I automatically in the running? If I do have to apply for them, what's the timeline? What's the deadline for those? But it's something you definitely need to plan ahead for. I want to name that your senior year in high school especially is so busy. You're taking likely the hardest academic rigor classes. Maybe you're in athletics, student organizations, maybe you have a job, maybe you have family obligations, on top of all the time it takes to apply to universities, right? But you have to plan ahead to also make time to apply for scholarships. There's a huge difference in the quality of scholarship applications from the students who throw together an essay the night before it's due versus the students who really dig in and take their time with a first draft, second draft, third draft, have other people read your essays and really talk to that essay prompt as well. But again, that takes a lot of time. One way to maybe justify that to yourself is if you spend 5 hours on a scholarship essay, and that scholarship gets you $1,000, if it's $1,000 scholarship, that's a lot better than you'd be making a part-time job, right? So maybe thinking of it that way might be helpful because it is an investment in yourself. If you're looking at national scholarships, don't get scammed. Unfortunately, a lot of the just if you Google scholarships, some of those sites are just trying to take your money. So if you're being asked for credit card information or your social security number, keep moving. But we know that these are some trusted and vetted search sites. Now I'm going to move on to UW-Madison specific financial aid programs. But a question you can be asking no matter what program you're looking at, or excuse me, what university you're looking at is, what are your financial aid programs? Do you have any tuition promise programs, and how can I qualify for them? So UW-Madison, we have Bucky's Tuition Promise. We're really proud of this. This is our commitment to Wisconsin residents who are either freshmen or transferring in from another university, who have a family household adjusted gross income of $60,000 or less. If this is you, we will cover your tuition and fees for 4 years or 2 years if you're a transfer student. There's no additional application. It's all based on the information right from the FAFSA and would automatically be part of your financial aid offer. I also want to name that the Wisconsin Board of Regents announced a Wisconsin tuition promise just about a month or so ago, where it's a new program. This is separate from Bucky's Tuition Promise, but it was based off of Bucky's Tuition Promise for any other UW school in the state, not UW-Madison, but these are other UW schools, where if you have a household adjusted gross income of $62,000 or less, then tuition and fees will be covered at those universities as well. The details are continuing to be worked out. So if you have questions about that, you can ask the other universities that you're interested in about that. All right. So going back to UW-Madison specifically, we also have something called Bucky's Tuition Promise Plus. This is for our Pell Grant eligible Wisconsin residents. So after you fill out the FAFSA, you get that student aid report. If you're a Wisconsin resident and it tells you that you're Pell Grant eligible, then you know that at UW-Madison, we will cover your full financial need for 4 years if you're a freshman, or 2 years if you're a transfer student. Now remember, financial need is jargon. It's the cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution. And we cover that financial need with grants, scholarships, and federal work study. I'll talk about work study in a bit. Next up is Badger Promise. This again is for Wisconsin residents who are first generation college students. When I say first generation college student in the Wisconsin system, a first generation student is a student who does not have a parent with a 4-year degree from the United States. So even if you have a parent with an associate's degree, but not a 4-year degree, you're first gen. Even if you have a parent with a 4-year degree, but it's from another country, you're still first gen. So this is for students who are transferring from a 2-year UW college or a select list of liberal arts associate degree programs, which you can find on our website. We'll cover tuition and fees for 1 year or 2 years if you're Pell Grant eligible. And lastly, for our in-state students is Fast Track. This is, again, for Wisconsin students who are incoming freshmen or transferring in. We will meet full financial need for 8 consecutive semesters or 4 years, or 2 years if you're a transfer student, if you're a public assistance recipient. And I want to point out that that includes free or reduced lunch. There is a question on the FAFSA about this. So again, no additional application, all automatically part of your financial aid offer. If you're an out-of-state student, our out-of-state programs may vary from year to year. So I do recommend checking in with our net price calculator or giving our office a call to see what is available for non-residents. So that's the portion of the presentation where I talked about the good stuff, the grants and the scholarships. Or I shouldn't just say the good stuff, right? There's loans can be okay, right? If we need to take out loans to make our higher education a reality, that's accessible to you. And employment as well. So usually when people think about financial aid, they don't necessarily think about loans and employment, but the reality is that these can be included in your financial aid offer and can be used as resources to help make your dreams of getting a degree a reality. So I'm going to talk more about all of this. In terms of loans, there are several different kinds. We do know that they have to be repaid. Many have to be repaid with interest. There's the federal direct loans, private loans, and Parent Plus loans. I'm going to talk about federal direct loans first, because these are the loans that you have access to by being a student and by filling out the FAFSA. It's not connected to credit or anything like that. You just automatically have access to these, and they're under your name. Repayment is the student's responsibility. There's 2 different types. Subsidized and unsubsidized. Of the two, subsidized is better because the federal government subsidizes the interest while you're in school. So in other words, subsidized loans don't accrue interest while you're in school, or until you drop below part-time. Unsubsidized loans do accrue interest while you're in school. But both of these types of loans, you don't have to start making payments on until 6 months after you graduate or drop below part-time. The federal government sets a cap at how much you have access to each year. So freshmen have access to $5,500. That goes up to $6,500 for sophomores and $7,500 for juniors and seniors. The interest rate on that loan is set each academic year by the federal government. The interest rate is a fixed rate loan. So if you took it out 1 year and it's set at 4.99%, it's 4.99% for the life of that particular loan. This year's fee is, this year's interest rate is 4.99%. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what it's going to be next year. The feds usually announce the interest rate around July of each year. And then there's also an origination fee of 1.057%. That's the fee that the feds charge to lend, and they take it right off the top. So let's say that the $5,500 of that federal direct loan isn't enough to cover all of your expenses, and you know that you need to borrow more. You have a couple options. The first is a Parent Plus loan. This is a loan from the federal government. It's under the parent's name. Repayment responsibility can't be transferred to the student. It is the parent's responsibility for repayment. You can find the application at studentaid.gov. And the interest rate for this academic year is 7.54% fixed. And there is an origination fee of 4.228%. So if a parent took out a $10,000 loan, the feds would keep about $423, but you still owe $10,000. That's what that origination fee means. There are also private loan options. This is a loan that is taken out from a bank or a credit union. Typically, it's taken out under the student's name, but the student needs a cosigner. And the interest rate on that loan is based on their cosigner's credit. There are some private lenders who offer parent loans as well, where it's under the parent's name. So that's something to look into as well. All right, that's loans. Now we're going to switch to employment. Students, you could get a job. You can make some money, right? Get a paycheck. Now, sometimes we get a little pushback, usually from parents, saying, oh, I don't want my student to have a job their freshman year. They're juggling so much, right? They're figuring out new life on a new campus, the rigor of the academics, new friends, all of that stuff. I totally get it. It is definitely a personal decision if you want to have a job. And there's a ton of research that shows that students who have an on-campus job their freshman year do better academically and are more likely to graduate on time than their peers who don't have a job. And the number one reason for that is time management. Students, this might be the first time in your whole life where you have a half day, or maybe you get super lucky and you have a whole day where you don't have any classes. There's no place where you have to be. And it is so easy to keep watching that next episode on Netflix or playing your video game or watching your TikToks or, doing whatever you do where you lose time. Instead of feeling the sense of urgency of utilizing the out of the classroom time to study. And that is such a big difference between high school and college, is utilizing that out of the classroom time. So if you pop in a few hours to work here and there, it definitely helps with that time management piece. We generally see students having the most success working between 8 and 15 hours a week, but that again is also a personal decision. Having a job is also a great way to meet other folks that you wouldn't otherwise be meeting in your residence halls or in your classes. And you get a paycheck, right? You got some money. Maybe not $4 signs worth of a paycheck. I'm thinking about like Yelp, Yelp and saying how expensive the restaurants are. Anyway, you get a paycheck. That's great. Some of you might have federal work study as an option on your financial aid offer. Federal work study is not money that goes up front to pay tuition over time. So that's something to be aware of as you're comparing financial aid offers. Federal work study is basically just like any other job on campus. You apply to the job, you get accepted, you earn whatever the wages are of that job, you get a paycheck every other week, you use that paycheck how you want. The benefits of work study are twofold. One, the federal government pays for half of your wages up to the amount that's listed on your financial aid offer. So that means you're a cheaper employee to the university. At UW-Madison, for instance, that means that there are some departments who can only hire work study students. Another benefit of work study is whatever wages you earn through a work study job aren't counted against you on the FAFSA in the future. So that's what work study means. Now, there are some schools who have their own institutional work study program, either on top of or instead of federal work study. If you are going to a school like that, ask that university how that works. All right, so let's say you get accepted to your top choice school. You celebrate, right? You get your financial aid offer, and maybe you have some scholarships coming in. Maybe you have some savings. Maybe you're getting some grants. Maybe you know you're going to take out the $5,500 of the federal direct loans, but there's still a gap in your cost of attendance. If you're in that circumstance, what are some resources you can utilize to fill in that gap? I've already talked about most of these. I just want to recap. The first is the Parent Plus loan and a private loan. If you have a gap in your cost of attendance, you can apply for a Parent Plus loan or a private loan. Something to pay very close attention to is how that is listed on a financial aid offer. There are some schools that automatically include a Parent Plus loan in the financial aid offer as a way to fill in the gap. There are some schools who do not automatically include that. Because you have to be eligible for a Parent Plus loan, you have to want it and apply for it. There are separate processes to get that Parent Plus loan. So when you're comparing financial aid offers, again, make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. Just because it isn't listed on one financial aid offer doesn't mean that you don't have access to it. You still can apply for that. Another thing to point out is scholarships. Scholarships are not something that you should just be paying attention to your senior year in high school. You should be applying to scholarships all throughout your undergraduate career. Employment, just talked about that. You can get a job, earn some wages, right? And there are some other financing options. Most universities have some sort of installment plan where it splits up your payments over a certain amount of time. That could be something you can look into. The rest of the things that are listed on this slide exist in the world, students and families have taken advantage of, but they're outside of the purview of a financial aid office to give any advice about. So if you have questions about home equity, life insurance policy, or pension plan loans, or things like HELOCs, or a 529 college savings plan, talk to a financial planner, talk to a certified tax professional, talk to the 529 administrator. These are things that are just outside of the purview of a financial aid office. All right, so next steps. If there's any sophomores watching this, way to plan ahead. Mark October 1st, 2024. That's when you'll fill out the FAFSA for the first time. Be sure to focus on your high school academics and your overall well-roundedness. So getting involved, leadership opportunities, things like that. Create a budget and a savings plan. It's never too late to save for college. And follow the news on FAFSA simplification to see how that impacts you down the road. For our juniors, October 1st of next year is when you'll fill out the FAFSA 2023. Continue to look for scholarships, follow a budget and a savings plan. You may want to check out the student aid estimator. That helps you estimate how much financial aid you might be eligible for. Now, that is based on the current calculation of the FAFSA, so I'm not sure when that might get pulled, but know that it exists right now. Follow news on FAFSA simplification and look at any pre-college programming too. A lot of universities across the country offer pre-college programming experiences over winter break, spring break, summer break, and those can really help elevate your application when you're applying to universities, and really set you apart and give you some really great experience to draw from. And some of those pre-college programs have scholarships available too. Seniors, you can fill out the FAFSA now if you haven't already. Apply for scholarships. Follow a budget and a savings plan. The more comfortable you are before you come to college with budgeting, the easier it'll be once you're here. Check out pre-college programming, see what's going on over winter break, over spring break. And this is a big one. Talk to your family about money. Don't wait until you come to college to figure out who's paying for what. Have those conversations ahead of time to make sure that everyone is crystal clear and on the same page. I know sometimes those conversations are uncomfortable, but they're really important to have. Feel free to contact us. And if you're on social media, I highly recommend that you I highly recommend that you follow the social media handles of the financial aid offices, specifically of the universities that you're interested in, not just the general social media handles, because we at UW, we post random scholarships that nobody hears about, right? We post about events across campus where there's free food, and different budgeting and financial wellness tips as well. So do follow us. And know that even if you have no intention of coming to UW-Madison, we are here as a resource. So if you have questions as you're filling out the FAFSA, know that you can contact our office and we will help as we can. Here's a little QR code. If you want to get on a listserv to have to get information from UW-Madison's admissions office and the financial aid office, go ahead and take a picture of that QR code and fill out the Google form with your information, and we'll keep in touch with you. That is all. Please feel free again to reach out to our office with any sort of question that you may have. Good luck with your college application process and take good care. Bye. Thanks for sticking with me.